Hello, everybody, and welcome to another edition of Data Chat Live. I am Cameron Cowan, your host, and with me, as always, is Mike Fong. Say hello to everybody, Mike.
Hi, everyone. Hope you're all well. Great
Mike,
to be doing this again.
how's everything going on your side of the world?
Specifically, in what way?
I haven't been over in a while. I'm wondering, is it sunny? Are you getting some summer weather? What is it looking like over in London?
Well, Brits apparently have a reputation for always talking about the weather. So I'll be brief. It's really sunny. It's really nice. We had some thunderstorms, but then went back to being nice. So yeah, we've just come back from Adobe Summit in London, which was a great experience. Great to have Adobe Summit in person again. So yeah, just it's been going really well.
Awesome. And it's been I think a couple months since we've gotten together on a regular US time frame. I think the last Data Chat Live we held was more focused on the European market, which is great. I got to get up at 2 a.m. for that. And you've been gallivanting around the world. Do you want to give a brief mention of what you've been doing over the last month or so?
What have I? Well, I've been at Observe Point for 7 years. Well, actually 7 years last September, so 7.5 years now. And Observe Point is, awesome company. We've got a really cool sabbatical benefit. So I have been to Japan for my honeymoon, and I spent a couple of weeks there, which was awesome. And then after that, I went to Hong Kong and I visited my extended family, my cousins, my granddad. He's 91 years old. So shout out to my granddad. He's probably not watching this, probably not understanding what I'm saying, but it's always great to see my granddad, a completely self-made and selfless man.
That's fantastic.
Been back here and just taking a chill pill.
Well, we're glad to have you back, and we're glad to bring in a special guest today. Today we have with us one of the newest members of the Observe Point partner ecosystem, Lee Evans from Protiviti. Hi, Lee. How are you?
I'm good. Glad to be here.
Awesome. Rather than me giving a long-winded introduction that's probably going to make some mistakes, why don't you tell you a little bit about yourself? Tell us about Protiviti and then what your role is there currently.
Sure. So I always state myself as basically a recovering programmer and database architect. I've been in the space for well over 20 years, started in SEO, came in and fell into analytics and data and architecture and kind of stayed there and fell into the Adobe world and been working with the whole Adobe stack for probably about 15 years. Started with Omniture and then just working through there. But working with Protiviti, I manage the analytics and experience and SEO teams. And what we do at Protiviti is we're an Adobe partner, and we focus primarily on implementations with that with that in mind. But we also work with Oracle and Salesforce, but we're just one part of Protiviti. Protiviti is actually really big. It's owned by Robert Half. So if you've ever heard, most people have heard of Robert Half. We are a subsidiary of that. And we have other divisions that focus on like lawyer consulting and accounting and all of those other things. And they started Protiviti Digital 2 years ago. So that's where we're at.
Fantastic. Now, you mentioned 15 years or more in the space working with marketing technologies, analytics. Tell us a little bit about the path that you've taken to get to Protiviti and what you're doing today. What does that background look like?
So I started programming when I was little. I'm not like sixth grade. I started programming on a
Commodore 64.
VIC 20, I'll have you know, but at school we had a 64 and fell into programming and in databases and was doing database architect. But then the internet started really taking off and figuring out like, hey, these search engines, right? They're just giant databases. And how do you get the right data on the right page? So started doing SEO before even Google was a thing, and just went from SEO and the PPC and then analytics. Analytics really started to pick up once Urchin was around. And really analytics is where I started just to hone in on once we did that, SEO and all of that went around. So social media as well, wrote a book about social media called Social Media Marketing Strategies for Facebook and Twitter and other social media. But then really just fell into the MarTech because I understood the technology piece and the data piece, and I understood the marketing piece from doing SEO and PPC and all of that. So that's how I ended up getting where I'm at, primarily focusing in on data, making sure data architectures are right for clients.
Wow, I had no idea you were a published author. That's news to me as of right now. That's great.
Sometimes I forget about it.
That's very cool. Now, I introduced you as one of the newest members of the Observe Point partner community because we've launched recent efforts with Protiviti and are building out that partnership. But really, you're very familiar with Observe Point, and
Yeah.
you've been in and around the technology for a number of those years. When was the first time you encountered OP?
2013, 14, somewhere in that range. It wasn't like I know the guys helped build Omniture and then sold Omniture to Adobe, and it was soon after that they started Observe Point, and the company I worked for at the time had a partnership with Rob. I know more a relationship with Rob, so we kind of worked from there, and that's where I started working with Observe Point. And as I've gone from mostly agencies, I worked a little bit with Vanguard for about 2 years as a contractor, but as agencies, that's like the tool I use, like to QA and to say, hey, what's going on with someone's site and what are they using? What kind of data is going in and out?
Yeah, it was funny. As soon as you said Omniture, for some reason, I just still get the warm fuzzies. That brand and that company has a lot of meaning to me as the place where I started my career. And when I think about John Pastana, one of the co-founders of Omniture, obviously co-founder and CEO here at Observe Point, the way I hear him talk about it, where the genesis of analytics was great, and they were starting to get all this fantastic data and information about how people were behaving on websites. But the problem was, even though the first days of implementation were good and they get it rolled out and be happy, after a couple of months, couple of quarters, several years, things just fall apart. And so building out a platform and a tool like Observe Point for John was all about, well, I love the data, but I also need to make sure that it's good and reliable going forward. Tell me a little bit about how you think along those lines, as far as how do I make sure not only is the MarTech and specifically the analytics that I'm deploying, how do I make sure that's good out of the gates, but also how do I maintain that over time?
Well, definitely using Observe Point to help with that, because if analytics is analytics or even Target or any kind of, and I lean towards always going to the Adobe end because that's where I kind of live in and day out, but even other tools that are similar to any analytics tool or experience tool, or even if you're serving down, DMP, pixels and things like that for identity resolution. If you're putting those out and you're along with the implementation and you put it there, but you're not writing along anymore if they're doing updates, right? You're not involved. And that's generally tends to happen, right? That you're not involved, or you're coming in after the build of a site, whether it's AEM, Sitecore, and then you come in and you put your implementation in. And then after that, you're backing away from the developers, but they're still doing other things. And they're not necessarily thinking about raising their hand and saying, hey, the analytics people need to measure this, or hey, maybe we need to do something with Target or optimization on this. And they're pushing these new things out there, and you don't know if they're breaking your code. You don't know if it's not working. So that's why Observe Point is so good to help you figure out, is my stuff still working, and keeping up with the changes that are happening, and stopping that fall apart piece.
Obviously, you have a fair bit of background on the agency side of things. In that role, do you see that it's pretty common where you're either coming in on a project base where your team is in charge of the implementation, and then you have to hand it over to the end client, the end brand, to then run it ongoing, and maybe some things fall apart? Or on the flip side, do you find yourselves parachuting in quarters or years after the initial implementation and having to clean up somebody else's mess? Does it look a lot like that, or
it's about half and half?
Okay.
Yeah.
And how do you deal with that? Is it just, well, I it's in my lap now, I got to clean it up? Or what are some of the principles you think about as you do that type of project-based work?
Right. So I leverage, if we're coming in and parachuting in, I don't like to just parachute in. I like to figure out what's going on. I usually take a peek before we even sign like the SOW to come in and bring in our parachute. but prepare myself, and I usually will get some kind of idea of what's going on. So like I can see if there's old architecture in, like when we used to, way back in the day before virtual report suites in Adobe, you used to do this thing called multi-view report suite reporting. And now that's kind of old architecture, but clients still have this in place and they don't know about virtual report suites. So those things I can see, I can look at, and Observe Point helps me see that, and some other tools as well. So I'll set the groundwork, and then I can come in, and once we're in there, then I really leverage. That's where we really try and leverage Observe Point to see what's going on, and then we come up with a plan, do an audit, show the clients what's going on, and come up with a plan for the new architecture, or to mature them along the way. If we're fixing things, I like to call it maturing the client.
I've got a question. So you mentioned running some scans kind of at the beginning and throughout the process. Have you found, have you done a project where you feel you would have made a lot of mistakes had you not scanned a client's website at the start of the process? Because we really like to think that Observe Point is really helpful, just at even the beginning of any kind of change project, any large transformation. You don't want to be going in like a commando without any intel, right? So do you find that Observe Point is helping you save time and plan more effectively?
Yeah, because I can then see what technologies the client already has, and are they integrating it in with whatever we're working with. If it's analytics, if it's experience, testing or experience delivery, if it's we're working with a CDP or DMP, are you integrating those data, or using those data points? And, we can see things as well and start to point out, oh, well, did you know like XYZ is constantly firing and we didn't even know we had that tag in there. So like, there is a point too where,
thanks to Observe Point, where you could have seen that and bring that up to the attention of the client in advance, right?
Seeing those piggybacking pixels is like, and seeing where they're how they're loading is a big help, because I've actually had a client where we were managing the tag management, and so anything that needed to come in, and it was for a financial client, and so we needed to manage that because of the data things that they had to adhere to with compliance. And they had gotten a marketing company, and the marketing company said, hey, can you put these Google pixels down for us? Sure, we can go ahead and do that. It's all approved. I'll put that in there. And not long after we put that in, and they knew about this process, that they had to come through us to do this. And not long after, we started seeing these other pixels being pushed down, and they were actually in Google in the ad platform and pushing more tags down, and they weren't approved. And so we were able to point that out and show that to the client, and they, say, hey,
why does that even happen? We see that we call it piggybacking tags. We see it comes through double-click floodlight tags very frequently. Why does that happen? Is it because double-click tag is very customizable, or is it that Google by default packs it full of stuff?
Yeah, you can push more code down in. So in this case, they were pushing down LinkedIn and something else. Like there was, and it's about 4 or 5 years ago now. Right. Yeah, about 4 years ago.
And is that just supposed quality of life and convenience that Google DoubleClick provides to marketing agencies?
Yeah, they do that to let them. And it's something that and I don't know if they've kind of fixed that wall, because I haven't seen it too often anymore. So maybe they fixed it so you can't put so much in there. But what happens is because these other people don't want to play nicely. They want to skirt around, and they want to get things done really fast. And that's when they found that little loophole, they can push it in. And, they didn't want to have to deal with compliance and process. They just wanted to get their stuff down so they could do their own measurement and not abide by the client wanting to measure everything in Adobe Analytics at this point.
Lee, I've been jotting down a few things because you've hit a lot of bases that I want to cover, probably more than we have time for. But you've mentioned up front that your practice right now is currently with analytics, SEO, and performance. Were those the three?
Data,
Data?
data. So analytics falls into there, but so does CDPs,
Okay.
DMPs, and then experience. So experience like A/B testing, delivering experiences, or multivariate testing. And then I have an SEO team, a search engine optimization team.
And what I love about your perspective is that you're not thinking about any one of those practices in a silo. You're not thinking about how is my Adobe Analytics implementation going, or how am I using Target to do A/B testing. You're thinking about that entire stack and ecosystem and how they're all working together, or if they're working together. So I'm gonna throw a bit of a loaded question at you. It's something I've been thinking about a ton over the last year or so, and it's this concept of governance. I hear it thrown around in the industry quite a bit, and it seems like everybody comes to the table with their own semantic attachment to what that means to them. From your perspective, when we talk about website or digital governance, how do you define that? What does that mean to you?
So it does depend client by client, first off, because it depends on where you're located and what kind of rules and everything you have to govern by, but then also industry wise as well, because financial industry has different types of compliance, to medical, to financial loans, all those things. So that's the first thing. Is I always, when I come into a project, that's when I always talk to their legal or whoever governs over governance. What data can they collect? Because all these there are more and more governance departments in bigger companies and enterprise companies, because of having to be able to comply, like with California's thing, you can be sued, right? Yeah, because they can do a class action lawsuit, where in Europe, it's just basically the European Union is going to fine you for, having those things. So understanding where you're at in the world, and then working with the governance to define that process. So it's going to be different for everybody. But what I more define it as is adhering to what your company's standard is for what data I can collect, what data I can share, and what do I do when somebody says, don't collect my data anymore. So that's where, and that's built into our process as well. We always, when we come in, when we're doing any kind of discovery, legal or governance or compliance is always involved in the process, because we don't want to upset the apple cart, so to speak.
Yeah, and let me restate a couple of those things. And I like first that you said it does depend client by client. Part of that is industry specific. Different industries have different standards to adhere to. If I'm going to extrapolate out further, just taking off the website or digital part of it, just governance in general is establishing a set of standards. If I'm a government that's governing, I have laws or regulations. If I'm a company, I have company standards. And if I'm in a specific department in marketing, I have my own standards. So establishing those standards, and then, as you said, making sure you know what's actually happening, what's the reality on the ground, and then comparing those two. And as you see differences between what is the standard and what is the reality, then it's a matter of, okay, now I know what the actions are I need to take, whether it's I need to clean up the reality, I need to remove tags or cookies, or clean up the implementation, whatever that looks like. Or potentially over time, especially as we've seen laws and regulations. You mentioned CCPA out of California. Mike knows all about GDPR in Europe. As those things evolve, sometimes we have to update what the standards look like as well. So it's kind of a give and take between what are the standards I'm working with, what is the reality, and do I see delta between those two? Would you agree with that summation?
Yeah, awesome. And getting a process in place, and everybody knows that process, because like with the bank client that I was talking about, the financial client, they had a process in place, and then somebody didn't follow the process. They skirted around the process, and it come back, and that marketing vendor for them that was managing their PPC, they weren't around 2-3 months later. So because of the compliance, they found a new partner.
I mean, for financial institutions, of course, governance is very important for them. So for one of their agencies to basically think, oh, it's inconvenient, I think I'll just take the easy way out, then it's really the wrong approach to take. So I think they've taken the right action there by dumping that agency, whoever they were.
Yep.
Hope they learned their lesson.
Now,
I don't know, maybe.
Did they? Did they do it again?
I haven't encountered that agency again, so.
let's hope they're still around. Now, Lee, you've mentioned a number of different technologies. We talk a lot on this webcast about analytics, about privacy. I want to talk about a couple of other pieces of tech in a marketing technology stack that you've mentioned individually. One is personalization engines. You talked about Adobe Target. Obviously, there's other platforms like Optimizely, Maximizer. Google had their own Google Optimize that's getting sunset, I believe, coming up here in just a few months. So if you're on Google Optimize and you don't know, that's coming up in September. You should start looking at some other A/B and multivariate testing platforms. When you think about your role in governing that and the A/B testing framework, does that follow the same rules as an analytics deployment? It's just a different part of the MarTech stack, or do you think about it differently?
Again, it really depends on the client, So if you have somebody that's very heavily regulated, then and they're in an industry that's really heavily regulated. So pharma, example, right there with pharma. There are certain things they can say and they can't say in the United States, but how do they market it, in another country, So those things you have to kind of keep in mind with that governance and what data you're using to personalize that experience. So if they've opted in Europe but they've not opted out in the US, looking at those pieces of privacy and consent is very important to understand for what you're doing with the experience delivery. So that falls under, like, if you're doing anything with OneTrust, that falls under performance cookies. And do they accept it? Do they not? So you have to take it again, client by client, industry by industry, but generally when you're doing experience, you're going to want to measure what's going on. So analytics is going to be involved in some way or shape or form. And that's always going to fall into there whenever we're doing it.
Yeah, I think when you talk about data platforms in general, web analytics, but also DMPs, CDPs, anything that's collecting data, a lot of times that's behind the scenes. And yes, it has to be governed. It has to be according to consent. But with testing and personalization platforms specifically, those are collecting data on the back end and also delivering experiences on the front end. So it's more, in my mind, it's more multi-dimensional than just purely collecting data alone.
And you can feed streams into, well, for most of the tools, I'm not, there are other tools out there, they might not bring in the feeds, but you can bring in data from different tools and integrate them, especially into Target and Optimizely. You can bring those in, and based off of the audience that this person is in, if you've got them with an ID resolution, now can I personalize that experience based on them being in that audience? So that's where the management of that data and pushing those streams and where you can push these people to and what information you can push in the streams, that's all under the CDP or the DMP, that level. So you can tag certain pieces of data as PII, and it can only be shared with the email. Like if you have an email marketing platform, the email address is PII, but it can only be shared with the email platform. If it's like, hey, this person likes red or green, anybody that likes red or green, or hey, they're a subscriber or not a subscriber, and I'm pushing them to an audience in Target, that's not necessarily PII on them. So, it's all about how that data is architected in the back end and set into the experience tools.
Yeah, there's obviously, for any business, there are valid and good reasons to be collecting personal information or personally identifiable information. And you want those to go into the right systems, but you don't want them going everywhere, which is just another layer of that governance. It actually feeds into the last technology type I wanted to ask you about, and that's CDP. I've watched this market evolve and change and kind of mature over the last 3 or 4 years, but it seems like everybody I talk to still has a different definition of what is a CDP. So what is the Lee Evans answer to that? What is a CDP for you?
So I kind of liken them to like a data traffic cop and opportunity for data, because you're dealing with the data in real time and you're moving it based on what engagement is happening, and it's happening in real time. And then you can use, you store that data, and I consider that more like a hot database in somewhat of a sense. And compared to like a Snowflake database or a data lake or whatever, Domo, all your data is going out there and it's kind of cold. It doesn't change that often, but CDPs deal with the things that are changing all the time. So then they also be able to allow you to build out these audiences and find lookalike audiences. So that's why I say I look at them more like a traffic cop, because they're saying, hey, I got this piece of data, and this piece of data indicates that this person likes this or likes that, and maybe we can build out an audience of other people that look like this person over here. So it's moving the data around and letting you find really good opportunities with them.
Yeah, I once heard somebody crudely describe it as a CDP is a technology platform that allows you to collect data from anywhere, do some stuff to it, and then send it to anywhere.
Yeah, it's
that sounds about right.
Yeah, hot ETL, maybe. I don't know.
That is too vague. That is too vague. I don't like it.
Yeah, but I really do like your description of a hot database. It's not just data being sent somewhere to be stored or potentially analyzed. We all know that data lakes often become data swamps, but it's actually sent to then combine it with other data or enrich it or map it together with profiles and then send it on for some type of activation, whether that's personalization and testing or targeting or email marketing, whatever that purpose is. I think CDPs really are starting to become more critical to a tech stack. Obviously, we've seen some of the big players like Salesforce and Adobe announce their own homegrown CDPs. I think at one point I thought they would just wait to see who the best player was and then go acquire them, as they've done with a lot of the rest of their stacks. But it was interesting to say that, no, this is core to what we're doing, so we're going to build it on our core platforms. And that really brings me to the last point of discussion I wanted to hit up with you. And that is, when we take all of these technologies as a whole, you've mentioned the Adobe ecosystem a couple of times. Obviously, I have warm feelings having worked there for a number of years, but also having experience and exposure to Salesforce and their platform, Oracle, Google. There's a lot of these kind of all-in platforms that say, we're going to make all these pieces work and we're going to cover all your bases in just a one-stop shop. How do you think about that as you're advising all of the different clients that you're working with? Is it better to go all in on Adobe or Salesforce or Oracle, or is it better to be best of breed? Say, you know what, I'm going to pick and choose the things that I like. And if that causes a little bit extra work, because I have to link together things that aren't naturally linked together, but I then get the better performing tools across those stacks. How do you think about that?
So that, again, it always comes back to like the client's tolerance. Budget wise, do they have the resources in-house to go all in on a Salesforce stack or an Oracle stack or an Adobe stack? And then what kind of help do they need, right? And what are they trying to do at the end of the day? So example on CDPs, right? Not all CDPs are the same. So there are like Adobe's CDP. It's basically, you're just taking Audience Manager and now you're moving it on Edge, and it's a little bit faster, but it doesn't have affinity in it, right? Where Analytics, who's another CDP, has this affinity. So what is the next best, thing that we can serve up, and it will do that processing for you really fast. So does a client go because it's all Adobe and linking them together is easy, or do they go for what is best for them, with that? So it's all about what will get a client to the end goal the fastest and the most efficient way.
Awesome. I just love that perspective, because I think so often in the business that Mike and I are in here at Observe Point, we focus in on individual use cases a lot of the time. We're talking to analytics teams that are focused on a small subset of technologies, or privacy teams that are focused on a different part of the stack. But where I really get excited is being able to understand what that entire stack looks like for any organization, being able to understand what is their data collection mechanisms and how are they activating that through testing and personalization, through marketing automation, through social media and paid advertising, and looking at that holistically. I think for me, governance is not so much about any individual part of that stack, but governance is how you understand what your standards are across the entire tech stack that you have, and then making sure you're always closing that delta between what your standards are and what the reality is.
Yeah, I love building out ecosystems for, for clients and seeing the next best thing that they could do to fill the gaps. And a lot of clients buy all these different tools and they don't know how to bring them together. And they don't know that in order to bring them together, you have to have a good data architecture and good data governance and taxonomy. And that's the foundation of everything that you need to build it to make it work right.
Yeah,
Don't forget the importance of having a team that actually, can keep it together. And brain drain is a thing. You lose the architect or something, and you have years of unknown pain ahead of you.
Well, and far too often people invest in a technology that they're obviously at some point sold on. They see the value, the promise, but then after 6 months, a year, 2 years, they give up on it and like, well, that doesn't work. And it's not that doesn't work. It's just they didn't, as you said, put the time into architect it, to map it out and to make it part of the greater whole. And they were just trying to run it as a one-off thing from one department or one dude in a corner, for example.
Yeah.
So, we're at the point now, we're about half past the hour. I want to do a little bit of rapid fire to wrap up. Mike Fong is always great about keeping track of what's going on in the industry. There's always things that are happening in other parts of the world that I'm hearing about them first from him. Mike, I'm sure you've come to the table with a handful of things you've been hearing about over the last couple of weeks.
Absolutely.
Rapid fire. What's going on in the world of digital right now?
Well, it's a bumper episode today. So obviously we haven't done this for about a month and a half, nearly 2 months perhaps. So firstly, of course, there is July the 1st being a big day for Google Analytics users, as I'm sure you'll be aware. And this is probably not news to anybody, but it says if you've already got an order for GA4 or some kind of additional order for Universal Analytics, you've got till July 2024. If you've not already got an order in, so I assume that means a paid order. So maybe with one of the systems integrators or an agency such as Protiviti. If a last gasp attempt, if you're in trouble and you haven't done any planning, you might just go and make some kind of order of any kind, and maybe you'll get that July the 2024 deadline. But July the 1st is not just important for Google customers. We also have some changes to CCPA. So what is it? CPRA, Cameron, is the updated, slightly beefier version of it.
The CCPA is the law. The CPRA are the amendments to the law that went live January 1st. And to make it even more confusing, the CPPA is now the new body that will be taking over enforcement from the Attorney General. The CPPA, not the CCPA.
Yes. Right. Well, the enforcement for the CPRA is starting July the 1st as well. So we can expect to see maybe some quick fire example bad guys coming out. Not to be outshone, Colorado and Connecticut as well are coming online, Cameron. So actually we found this pretty cool. Let's see if I can find this. Nope, I haven't got it up. There is a really cool sheet, actually, a PDF by the IAPP, who are kind of leaders in the space in kind of sharing information in the privacy space, going on about which states have what and when they started and when they become enforceable, but expect to see some kind of action coming out of Connecticut and Colorado as well.
Yeah, Lee, I want to ask you about that really quickly. Obviously, you do a lot of business here in North America. We've got 2 laws that are live with California, Virginia, Connecticut, and Colorado coming on board here in just a couple of weeks. And our home state here in Utah is hitting at the end of the year. There's also been 5 others that have been passed by legislatures. I think Iowa, Indiana, Montana, Tennessee, I'm going to miss one. Oh, and Texas has been passed but not signed. So with all of this change, how are you thinking about the way you're interacting with your customers on a privacy front?
I just, again, legal, bring your legal in, because every one of these are different. And I think you just need to take whichever one is the most strict, right? And really look at that and abide by that, because if you whatever one's the strictest, okay, then the other ones you're going to be abiding by with it. But it's really important just to remember if you're collecting data and you're using these more technologies, okay, anything, especially retargeting, and doing anything with retargeting, that's where it really lies, because nobody likes those creepy ads following you all around after you opted out, right? So just make sure you're in line with compliance, whoever's running your compliance department, or get one set up if you don't have one. And I'm sure there's also like outsourcing, like that legal departments, you can outsource to legal departments. Like, so we have our own at Protiviti, we have our own data governance group. And when we have a question about it, we tap into our data governance group to come back and actually look at that. So there are agencies that actually have their own divisions that have this type of consulting as well.
Yeah, everybody, if you don't have one by now, get legal advice, counsel, somebody you trust in the space to give you interpretation. We as a tech. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Even back in the day when I wrote my book, one of my chapters in the book was get legal involved from the start.
Yep. And Mike, I think you had also been mentioning the people that aren't getting the proper legal advice. There's been a few hefty fines just in the last several weeks over on your side of the world, haven't there?
Yes. So hot off the press. Well, there's a fine that Facebook was kind of got last month. That was the big one. That was the big one. 1.2 billion. That's the biggest so far. I mean, generally they are the big ones: Amazon's, Facebook's, Google's. But this was big. I don't think it was a surprise to anybody. In fact, I was actually looking at Meta's stock price. It's actually been improving. It's been growing massively since the beginning of the year. And this 1.2 billion fine didn't even shake them really. There was a spike and then a recovery. So this was not a surprise to anyone. Another big fine, Spotify, really fined by the Swedish Data Protection Authority. And fundamentally what they're saying, this is one of the 101 Dalmatians use cases or exemplar cases by NOYB and Max Schrems and his team. And basically it says that they didn't provide enough personal or complete information in the DSAR. So that is the deletion and the request where a customer can demand their data within, I think it's 24 or 72 hours. The complaint here that is that package of data wasn't complete. And you can imagine here that for any organization with, maybe a really large third-party ecosystem, right? Even if I just reload this page here, you can see how many third-party data, or how much there is. We talked about that piggybacking tag before on DoubleClick, right, Lee? Your most DSAR systems basically provide you with some kind of data discovery, but then you have to wire them up to automatically grab the data from these third parties to deliver them as a package to any customer who requests a DSAR. So imagine you really need to know what is on your website. It's that data discovery piece, which is really going to give you a full view of what should be in your DSAR. Otherwise, again, you're investing in these technology platforms, which you think are protecting you, but actually they're not doing a complete job. And an incomplete set of personal information was delivered to NOYB. So a large fine there, just confirmed yesterday, in fact.
Wow.
The day before yesterday, actually.
Yeah, we keep seeing these things roll in. I just can't stress it enough. With the changing ecosystem, with there being different jurisdictions that all have their different standards, we need to be across them. I think, Lee, your advice is sage, saying find kind of that lowest common denominator, or more the strictest common denominator.
The highest common denominator, right?
And then follow that, and then you should be okay. But even then, you still have to make sure you understand or have someone that you trust that understands the nuance between all of those things. All right. Well, I would love to chat for another hour, Lee. You and I, we've had some great discussions. I'm sure you and I will chat one-on-one, but our time here on DataChat Live has come to an end. There's just a couple of quick announcements I want to make for the group. We have a couple of things coming up here at Observe Point worth mentioning. Let's see if I can actually figure out how to share my screen back out. So we've got our tip jar, which is, oops, that's not what I want. I'll just leave it here. With tip jar, that's for customers specifically. So DataChat Live, we open up to the entire ecosystem. For our customers specifically, on June 27th, we'll be holding another tip jar, diving deeply into some recent updates. Cookie initiators is one of the coolest things we've released in a long time. Being able to not only see that entire inventory of tags and cookies on your site, but actually seeing which specific technologies are loading which specific cookies on which specific pages and making updates and deleting and all of that kind of interaction between technology and cookies. So we'll be diving deep on that here in a couple weeks on June 27th. And then a shout out to our user conference that we'll be holding here in Utah in September. A lot of our existing customers know about this Edge. Great event. We're expanding it. We're making it a little bit bigger this year. So we'd love to have everyone come out for that. With that said, Lee, if people want to get a hold of you, where can they find you? The Twitters, the LinkedIn,
LinkedIn, mostly LinkedIn. Twitter's the meme channel. I don't go on there. But mostly LinkedIn. You can find me on there or reach out to me, lee.evans@protiviti.com.
Terrific. Well, Lee, can't thank you enough for joining us. Love the partnership we're building between ObservePoint and Protiviti. And thank you for making the time. On behalf of myself, Mike Fong, and the entire ObservePoint team, thanks for joining, and we'll see you all next time.
Thank you very much, Lee. See you soon.
Thanks, guys. See you.